The Silent Human, HFY Sci-Fi Story. The grand throne room of the Zephyra Empire shimmered with cold light. Dozens of alien nobles stood in silent rows, their glassy eyes fixed on the single human standing before their queen. Commander Elias Ward, once a soldier of Earth's lost defense fleet, now stood alone, chained but calm. His posture was straight, his gaze steady, his silence louder than any scream. Queen Seraphine watched from her throne, her armor shining like molten silver, her crown of living crystal humming softly. She had conquered 10 worlds, burned 2 human colonies, and broken entire fleets with a single command. Yet the human before her did not kneel, did not plead, did not even look at her. It was as if he had decided that she did not exist. The court began to whisper, their words like small knives cutting through the silence. "Is he broken?" one asked. "No." Another replied, "He looks like he's waiting for something." The queen raised her hand, and silence fell again. Her voice, sharp and beautiful, echoed through the hall. "Human, you stand before the Empress of Stars, the one who ended your world's resistance. Speak, and perhaps you will be granted mercy." Elias did not answer. He only looked at the floor, then at the stars beyond the glass dome above them. It was the same sky he had once seen from Earth, and yet it felt so far away. Seraphine narrowed her eyes, unused to being ignored. To her, silence was defiance, and defiance was death. She rose from her throne and descended the crystal steps, her golden cape trailing behind her like fire. When she stopped before him, she could feel the strange human warmth radiating from his body. He was smaller than her, fragile by alien standards, yet something about him made her pulse quicken. She leaned close and whispered, "Why do you not speak, human?" Still, he said nothing. Only the hum of the hall filled the air. The guards tightened their grips on their energy spears, waiting for the order to strike. But Seraphine lifted her hand again, stopping them. There was something about his silence that made her hesitate. It wasn't fear she sensed, and it was control. It was power, quiet and unyielding. She turned to her advisor, Lord Tareth, whose pale eyes flickered like liquid glass. "Scan his mind," she commanded. "I want to know what makes him so calm." The psychic stepped forward, placing a trembling hand near Elias's temple. A beam of violet light spread between them, the air vibrating with psychic tension. Then suddenly the psychic screamed, collapsing to the floor, clutching his head. His thoughts are not human." He gasped, his voice shaking with horror. The court erupted in noise, the nobles backing away as if the man before them was cursed. Elias finally lifted his head. His blue eyes calm but ancient. Seraphine stared at him, feeling an emotion she had not felt in decades, unease. "What are you?" she demanded, her voice losing its perfect composure. He did not answer, but the faintest trace of a smirk touched his lips. It was not mockery, but pity, and that cut deeper than any insult. For the first time in her reign, the queen felt as if she stood before something she did not understand. She stepped back, her guards ready to strike. But she raised a hand again. No, she needed to know more. This human had survived her prisons, resisted her telepaths, and now defied her throne. He was not just silent, he was choosing to be silent. That choice itself was rebellion. As the queen returned to her throne, she kept her gaze on Elias. "Take him to the lower chambers," she ordered softly. "Keep him alive, I will speak with him again." The guards hesitated, confused but obeyed, dragging Elias away through the shining corridors of the alien palace. The court remained frozen in shock, unsure if the queen had been insulted or challenged. When the great doors closed, Queen Seraphine sat back and stared at the empty space before her. The human's calm eyes burned in her mind. Every other race she had conquered either begged for mercy or cursed her name, but this one stood still as if he was already free. She clenched her fists and whispered to herself, "Why does his silence disturb me so much?" Deep in the dungeons, Elias sat on a metal floor, staring at the flickering light above him. He thought of Earth, of the friends he lost, and of the promise he made before capture. Never let them see you break. He smiled faintly, knowing the queen would return, because silence in the face of power was the one thing no tyrant could endure. And in that silence, humanity was still fighting back. The queen's curiosity, HFY Sci-Fi Story. The days that followed were strange for Queen Seraphine. She had faced wars, rebellions, and assassins, yet none of them disturbed her thoughts like that silent human. Every night she dreamed of his calm face, those unshaken eyes that refused to see her as a goddess. Every morning she awoke wondering, why do I care? The palace was alive with activity. Reports of human prisoners being processed. Weapons examined, data extracted, but she found herself distracted, her mind wandering to the lower chamber where Elias was held. From the control room, she watched the security feeds. Him sitting cross-legged on the floor, tracing shapes on the metal with his finger. No prayers, no fear, no madness, just stillness. She had seen broken captives before, but this was not that he was thinking, planning, waiting. Her advisor, Lord Tareth, noticed her silence and bowed slightly. Your Majesty, the prisoner has not spoken a single word, he said. Our interrogators grow restless. Seraphin's voice was soft. Let them rest, this one is not to be broken by force, Tareth hesitated. Then how do we reach him, my queen? She looked at the screen, her silver eyes reflecting the image of the human. By curiosity, later that night when the halls were quiet, she dismissed her guards and entered the holding chamber alone. The door slid open with a hiss, cold air brushing against her armor. Elias sat on the floor, his hands bound, yet he did not look up. For a long moment she said nothing. Only the faint hum of alien machinery filled the room. Then her voice, soft but sharp. You have been silent for 7 days, human. He did not reply. Your kind always talk, she continued, pacing around him. When captured, they curse, they beg, they make promises of revenge, but you say nothing. Still, he stayed still. Seraphin stopped, folding her arms. Why do you ignore me? She whispered, her voice trembling slightly. For the first time, Elias moved, slowly raising his head, his gaze calm and piercing, and then he spoke, his voice low and steady. Because I see what you could be, and it terrifies you. The words cut through the air like a blade. Seraphin froze, not understanding, but feeling the weight of them in her chest. What did you say? She asked, taking a step closer. Elias tilted his head slightly. You don't fear humans, Your Majesty. You fear becoming like us. Her breath caught, her pride flaring. How dare you? But before she could finish, Elias continued, you rule through fear. You silence your people, and yet you wonder why no one truly follows you. He looked at her as though he saw her entire soul. That's why I don't speak to you, Queen Seraphin. Because words are wasted on someone who doesn't listen. Her heart pounded in her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not even her generals. And yet she did not order his death, she could not. There was something inside her that refused to silence him. She turned away, her voice sharp but unsteady. You speak as if you understand power, Elias replied quietly. I understand what it costs. As she left the cell, her mind burned with 1,000 thoughts. Was he provoking her or teaching her? She did not know. But she could not stop thinking about his words. That night, she walked to her private observatory, staring out at the ocean of stars, every empire she conquered, every world she ruled. All of it suddenly felt small. What you could be, she whispered, tasting the words. Was he mocking her? Or showing her something she refused to see? The next morning, the palace corridors were alive with rumors. The human prisoner had spoken, and the queen herself had visited him. Some called her foolish, others called it dangerous. Lord Tareth approached her, uneasy. Your Majesty, the council demands his execution. They fear what he might spread among the guards. Seraphin looked at him coldly. Then let them fear. Fear keeps them alive. But inside, she wondered, why do I protect him? That evening, she watched the human again on her screen. He sat quietly, his eyes closed, whispering something she couldn't hear. She ordered the sensors to enhance the audio. The translator flickered, capturing fragments of his words. It was not a prayer or a code, but a story. An old Earth story about endurance, about rising after every fall. Her heart tightened as she listened. It was not defiance she heard, but hope. When the feed ended, she stood in silence for a long time. Then she whispered to herself, hope, something we have forgotten. In that moment, the queen of 1,000 worlds felt something she had never known. Doubt, and somewhere deep within her, a spark was lit. A spark that would soon change everything. The Human Code, HFY Sci-Fi Story. The morning light of Zephyra Prime shone through the palace spires, reflecting across crystal towers and silver bridges. In the throne hall, Queen Seraphin sat alone, her eyes fixed on a holographic report about the human prisoner. It said nothing useful, no secrets, no coordinates, no codes, only a single repeated phrase that puzzled every translator. We rise even when buried, she whispered the words slowly, tasting them like an unknown language. Every translation attempt failed. Because the meaning wasn't literal, it was emotional. Something about those words felt alive, like they carried a force her empire had long forgotten. Hope. Down in the prison levels, Elias Ward sat quietly against the wall. He had been denied sunlight, but somehow he seemed stronger each day. The guards who passed him whispered that he never slept, that he smiled at the darkness as if it was his friend. Some even said they heard him humming strange human songs in the night. One young guard, Riva, couldn't resist asking him through the energy bars, "What does it mean, human?" "That phrase you repeat." Elias lifted his head slowly, his voice calm. "It means no cage lasts forever." Riva frowned, unsure if it was a threat or a promise. When she told her captain what he said, the captain laughed. But the words stayed in her mind like fire. That same day, the Queen called her scientists. "I want every record on human resistance," she ordered. "I want to know why they kept fighting even when their world was ash." The room fell silent. One scholar finally spoke, "Because, Your Majesty, they believed surrender was worse than death." Seraphin looked away, her thoughts heavy. For the first time, she wondered if victory had cost her more than defeat ever could. Later that night, she returned to the holding chamber. Elias sat in the same place, calm, unbroken. "I've read your history," she said quietly. "Your kind destroyed half your world before we ever reached it. And yet you call yourselves civilized." Elias looked up, his expression unreadable. "Civilization isn't about peace. It's about learning after chaos," he said. "Every time we fell, we built again, stronger, wiser, and more dangerous." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "And what have you learned now, prisoner?" He smiled faintly. "That even gods can forget how to feel." His words hit her harder than plasma fire. She turned away, but something inside her cracked. The guard saw her leave without a word, her steps slower than usual. That night she did not sleep. Instead she watched old records, the first contact between humans and Zephyra. The battles, the speeches of defiance from human captains before annihilation. Every word echoed the same spirit. "We rise even when buried." The next morning, the palace felt different. Workers moved slower. Whispers filled the corridors. Someone had etched human symbols on the walls of the lower decks. The same phrase Elias had spoken. The Queen demanded to know who did it. No one confessed. But every soldier she questioned looked her in the eyes with a strange new calm. When she returned to the throne room, Lord Tareth approached cautiously. "Your Majesty, discipline is weakening. The human's influence spreads like a plague." She stared at him coldly. "Perhaps it's not a plague. Perhaps it's a mirror." Tareth frowned. "You sound almost impressed." Seraphin turned away. "Maybe I am." That night she went again to the prison. No guards, no witnesses, just the two of them under dim blue light. She stood in silence for a long time, then whispered, "You've infected my people with your ideas." Elias looked at her calmly. "Ideas can't be caged." She stepped closer, her eyes sharp but curious. "Why do you keep saying we rise even when buried? Is it your code?" He nodded slowly. "It's more than a code. It's who we are. Every human carries it. Even in defeat." He paused, his voice low but steady. "You think silence is weakness? But silence lets you listen, and when you listen long enough, you hear the truth." The Queen stared at him for a long time, unable to speak. There was no arrogance in his tone. No rebellion, only conviction. She realized he wasn't fighting her empire. He was teaching it. That terrified her more than any weapon ever could. When she left, the words followed her like a ghost. "We rise even when buried." And far across the empire, on outposts and ships, the phrase began to spread, whispered by soldiers carved into walls. Carried like a secret fire, a single human had done what no army could. Plant doubt in the heart of an empire. The truth revealed. HFY Sci-Fi Story. The night sky above Zephyra Prime burned crimson as alarms echoed through the palace. For the first time in decades, the Empire's capital was under attack. Explosions trembled through the corridors, sending waves of dust and fear through the guards. Queen Seraphin stood at the window of her command chamber, watching fire rain down upon her city. Her empire, the one she had ruled through fear and perfection, was crumbling. "Rebel ships, Your Majesty," shouted an officer. "They've breached the defense grid." The Queen's voice was calm but cold. "How?" The outer rings were impenetrable. No one answered. Because they all knew the truth. Rebellion had grown from inside. Whispers, ideas, hope. The very thing the human prisoner had spread. The human code, as the soldiers now called it, had reached even the fleets down in the dungeons. Elias Ward heard the tremors and smiled faintly. He had not planned the rebellion, but he had expected it. Chains or not, ideas travel faster than any ship. The lights flickered, and the guards rushed past his cell, their eyes filled with confusion. One young soldier dropped her weapon in panic. Elias looked at her calmly. "You don't need to fear them anymore." The girl hesitated, staring at him, then pressed the unlock panel. The cell door opened with a hiss. Elias stepped into the corridor, moving like a ghost through smoke and light. The empire above was falling apart, but he walked with purpose. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for the truth. He climbed the stairs as explosions echoed closer, until he reached the upper throne level. The doors were half destroyed, and through them he saw Queen Seraphine surrounded by flames. She turned when she heard him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You," she whispered. "You should be in chains." "I was," Elias said, "but your people freed me." He looked around the broken hall, the once perfect palace now cracked and burning. "Your world is falling apart, Queen," he said quietly. "But not because of me." She clenched her fists, her voice trembling. "Then why are you here? To finish what your kind started?" Elias shook his head. "No, to keep you alive." Before she could respond, another explosion tore through the wall, and a blast of plasma fire rushed toward her. Without thinking, Elias moved, faster than any guard, grabbing her and pushing her behind the throne. The blast scorched the air, burning his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. Seraphine looked at him in shock, her voice breaking. "Why? After everything I did to your kind, why protect me?" He smiled faintly through the smoke. "Because that's what humans do, we protect. Even those who don't understand us." She felt her throat tighten, her heart trembling for the first time in years. The human she had caged was now her shield. The silence between them was louder than the war outside. When the fire faded, Elias helped her stand. "You can still stop this," he said softly. "Not by force, but by truth." She looked at the chaos through the shattered dome, the city lights dying one by one. "What truth?" she asked bitterly. Elias turned toward her, his eyes steady. "That strength without compassion always destroys itself." Outside, the rebel fleet's ships circled like vultures, demanding surrender. Seraphine walked to the balcony. Her crown cracked, her armor dim. Her people below watched their queen, unsure if she would fight or fall. Then, in a voice that echoed through the palace, she said, "Cease fire." Every commander froze, stunned. She looked at Elias once more, whispering, "You never ignored me, did you?" He shook his head gently. "No, I was waiting for you to listen." In that moment, something ancient broke within her, pride, fear, isolation, all shattered by a single human's calm. As she gave the final command to halt the battle, her empire trembled but did not fall, because for the first time the queen chose mercy over power. And in the burning sky above Zephyra Prime, a new light began to rise, not of conquest but of change. The Queen's Choice. HFY Sci-Fi Story. Smoke still curled from the towers of Zephyra Prime as dawn crept across the ruins. The once perfect city, gleaming with cold order, now carried the scent of ash and renewal. Queen Seraphine stood at the balcony of her damaged palace, the wind pulling at her broken crown below her. Thousands of Zephyra soldiers knelt in uneasy silence, not in obedience, but in uncertainty. Behind her, Elias Ward leaned against a shattered pillar, his wounds hastily bandaged. He watched the alien sunrise with quiet eyes, his voice calm. "They're waiting for you to choose what kind of ruler you'll be now." Seraphine turned slowly, her gaze heavy. "And if I choose wrong?" Elias replied, "Then history repeats itself. Another empire rises. Another world burns." His words carried no threat, only truth. The great hall doors opened with a hiss, and the High Council entered. 11 ancient beings in flowing armor. Their faces showed fury and fear. "Your Majesty," hissed Lord Tareth, "the rebels demand independence, our fleets demand vengeance, and this human stands beside you like an equal." Seraphine's eyes glowed faintly. "He is my equal," she said softly. Gasps filled the chamber. "You have forgotten," she continued, stepping forward. "That strength is not cruelty, and silence is not weakness." Tareth struck his staff on the floor. "The code he spread is corruption. It makes soldiers question command, captains hesitate, it is poison. Elias met his glare. No, he said quietly. It's antidote. The words echoed through the hall like thunder. For a moment no one spoke. No one dared to breathe. Seraphine raised her hand, the light of the dawn spilling across her silver armor. This empire was built on fear, she said, her voice carrying across every balcony. But fear cannot last forever. She turned to Elias. Humans rose from ashes, even when buried, even when forgotten. And I see now why. Her tone softened. Because you remember who you are. Even in defeat, she looked back at her council. I will not destroy what I finally understand. Tereth's voice shook with anger. Then you betray your crown. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. No, I honor it. She turned toward the planetary communication tower. Pressing her hand to the control node, a holographic broadcast lit the skies. Her image reaching every ship, every world under Zephyra rule. Her words were simple but shook the galaxy. From this day forward, humanity is no longer our enemy. They are a part of our future, across the Empire. Transmissions went silent, then erupted in chaos. Some cheered, some cursed, but none could ignore it. The Queen had broken 10,000 years of conquest with a single command. When the broadcast ended, she looked at Elias. This peace will not be easy, she said, her voice quiet again. My own people will turn against me. Elias smiled faintly. Then you'll rise. Even when buried. The phrase in her empire's new ghost felt different now. Not rebellion, but faith. He turned to leave, his steps echoing down the marble corridor. Where will you go? She asked. Home, he said. If Earth still remembers what that means. For the first time, the Queen's voice trembled. Elias Ward, thank you for teaching me how to listen. He looked back once, his face calm in the dawn light. And thank you for proving we were worth listening to. The human transport rose into the scarred sky, leaving trails of white against the burning clouds. Queen Seraphine stood alone on her balcony, the wind carrying his words through the quiet. We rise even when buried, and across the galaxy. Soldiers, rebels, and citizens whispered the same words. A phrase once spoken in defiance now became a promise. A promise that neither species would ever forget. The legend of the silent human had begun.